Good afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name is Eileen Burke and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. The videotaping today is sponsored by the Historic Preservation Fund of the U.S. Department of the Interior through the Nebraska State Historical Society and the City of Lincoln, a certified local government. Our speaker today is Ed Zimmer. Ed is native to Omaha, Nebraska. He has an undergraduate degree in art history and sociology from Lindenwood College in St. Charles, Missouri. He lived in Boston for 11 years and was a freelance architectural historian. And while in Boston, he received a PhD at Boston University in architectural history. In 1985, he returned to Nebraska and became, and still is, the City of Lincoln Historic Preservation Planner. Ed's talk today is, and the winner is, this is the PAL's 23rd Annual Awards. Please join me in welcoming Ed Zimmer.
Thank you, Eileen. As Eileen said, this has been going on quite a long time, 24 years next year. And part of the fun of the annual awards is the venue where PAL meets for the annual meeting, and we've met at various preservation sites, the old courthouse, the courtroom in the old post office before it was beautiful, and after it was beautiful again, at Whittier early on, and Whittier again after the university's nice adaptive reuse of the building, Whitehall out in University Place, and the Wyuka Chapel several years ago, Trinity Methodist down on A Street, and even in recent years, some of the fine dining establishments of Lincoln, including Valentino's in its original location, in its final moments there, but you can still recognize the sign. It's moved only just across the street to the east, and Valentino's is still there, almost on the original location, not in this building, but in the new one. And this year, PAL returned to Wyuka to the recently renovated historic stable building, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as I get further into the presentation. PAL has several categories, and one of the key categories from the beginning has been stewardship of a significant historic property. PAL has looked to some of the oldest properties in Lancaster County, like the Retzloff Farm out in Stevens Creek, and some of the younger historic properties, like Sheldon. Limestone in the Lancaster County version, and limestone in the Indiana version. And this year looked to a fine property at 33rd and Randolph, the Snell House originally, designed by F.C. Fisk. And as I thought about it for this year's award, I came to recognize this maybe is Fisk's greatest prairie school house. Fisk is never a strict prairie school architect, but he worked in every possible style, actually a few that seemed almost impossible. But in this, I think he really is pretty faithful to prairie school, especially in elements like that very low roof on the main entrance, the terraces that sweep around the building, the brick high up onto the second story and stucco above. And fortunately, the drawings for the building remain. On the back, originally had a built-in garage, and that is now where the present owners operate their pottery studio in what was the garage portion. They're making a little addition beside that to expand that space. But a fine property, beautifully maintained today, and PAL honored William, I'm guessing Biegert, and Kathleen Grossman, and William attended and received the award from Gary Martin, who heads up the PAL awards program for the organization and has for many years. So, and that's the back wall of what was the former stable portion of the stable building at Wyuka. PAL also has had a category to try to recognize the different sorts and grades, or different sorts of historic resources around the community, and has honored commercial and institutional buildings. Sometimes those were formerly residential, often not. Several years ago, honored the Muni Pool building, here shown in the winter, when in the early years it was used as a skating rink as well as a summer pool, and the Parks Department still operates part of their operation from that building. A couple years ago, it was this slip-covered building, honored for the State Department of Administrative Services when they took the slipcover off and showed the handsome downtown building that Transportation Services program uses for the state. And this year looked to the University of Nebraska, where one of the oldest buildings on the city campus, Brace Hall, which shows up in its mandatory historic postcards. I'm trying to see if maybe I can get historic postcards one of the requirements for National Register listing. And a building that has lost some of its ornament over the years, but was threatened pretty significantly a few years ago, and the decision was made not to take it down. The orange fence in this case meant renovation, not demolition. And features like the big lecture hall inside remain modern teaching space, and the lovely entrance with its rich terracotta surround, which says on the drawing, "Inscription here." Got the inscription physical laboratory, and in this renovation, that beautiful metal screen over the front door was recovered and put back up in great condition. And so PAL was pleased to honor the University of Nebraska for Brace Hall on the city campus, and Dale Bowder and Chad Lee from UNL, and Aaron Froschheiser from Leo A. Daly all kindly came and received the award at the annual meeting. So, residential property. Sometimes it's a very large building, like when the Levitt House took its move out into the country and became the Prairie House Bed and Breakfast. Sometimes a much smaller building, like the James House at 28th and N Streets in Woods Park, and sometimes kind of in between, this fine Tudor house on Holdridge. This year it was back to quite large again, and the Outcalt Hall House at 11th and D Streets in the Everett neighborhood, best known as the home of F.M. and Anna Hall. F.M. was a leading lawyer in town. Together, they were leading art patrons, and much of the art at Sheldon, I'm told fully a quarter of the number of pieces held by Sheldon came either directly from the Halls or from their bequest. They took their 1880s house and added a grand porch, and this is how the house looked in the former caretakers who were doing good work with the house but didn't take the big step of making it show on the outside what lovely Queen Anne it is. And it was the Baker family that took the step and really brought this house back to, I think, a gorgeous presence on the street. This house, because of the Hall's connection, has lovely things like Elizabeth Dolan's impressionistic views within the landscape space, and that pond is still there, and the landscape still lovingly maintained today. Dolan looked north to the little garden house, and it still stands. And this is a architectural work of Paul V. Highland of Chicago, who was in Lincoln in the late teens doing the terminal building, Frank Wood's house, the James and Gertrude McAfee house, and this little lovely garden house in brick and terracotta. And at the back is a terracotta fountain built into the alley wall. That still remains in that pretty little garden house. And one of the spectacular front porches in Lincoln. Think of this as summer air conditioning in the early 20th century. You could have your card parties out on the porch. Beautiful interior to the building as well. And so Powell was very pleased to present the residential rehab award this year to Paula and Greg Baker and their family. And Paula kindly attended with two of her children, who kindly decided they weren't going to stand up, but we were glad they were there. They've done a wonderful job turning this back into their family home. A few years after the program of awards started, PAL recognized they wanted to honor projects that may not be pure preservation projects, but certainly contribute to the continued use of historic properties or historic areas, and sometimes for new construction. And the Integration of Old and New Award was established. And I will point out one earlier award winner of Nancy and Charlie Ogden's beautiful carriage/guest house in Piedmont that matches their French eclectic house beautifully, but is brand new construction. And this year, PAL honored building originally built for Dr. O.C. Reynolds. I love this clipping that says, "Cement, the new building material, is coming into general use in Lincoln." And this was one of the very early concrete block houses in Lincoln at 2530 Q Street. And the inscription goes on, "It shows the character of house that can be created with its aid, with the aid of cement." This house had been the doctor's house, and then a boarding house, and then a single-family home again, and the single family did a lot of work on the property. But it was now converting to an office use under a landmark special permit from the city for NeighborWorks, an agency that particularly concentrates on home ownership and often is doing its work in this Hawley Malone neighborhood and elsewhere in the center of the city. So they took a building that had been, the renovation had begun but not reached the state it is today, and brought it the rest of the way. Rebuilding the front porch, which was trying to leave the rest of the building. Looking at details like the beautiful tile entryway, and restoring and then even extending that. It's a house that was tired, and a house that's no longer tired. And not only have they done beautiful work in putting it into this new use, but even honoring the house, commissioned furniture that would be very compatible with the character of the house, and light fixtures. And it's just a lovely office use, and I think inspires just the kind of activity that the agency is supporting in that area. And it takes a residential building that probably was larger than would be used today in that neighborhood today, and maintains it in a condition that could come back to residential again. They've been very thoughtful in the kind of adaptations made. Just a very handsome property. Staircase. I had the privilege of going through this building about 25 years ago. It did not look like this. One of the upstairs offices. And outside, a little tiny garage, original garage that was built at the back of the property and was no longer of a size that really offered anything in terms of storage of automobiles. My bicycle might have fit in it, but that was just about it. And was sitting right where necessary parking for the project would need to be. The frame and the structure was picked up and moved into the center of the yard space and converted into an outdoor pergola, a meeting space under shade, but preserves the form of that little old garage in a form that can be used today. It's a building with very handsome features and looks well from the street and functions well for the organization, extending the more modern garage that was already on the property into their classroom and meeting room for the organization and the home ownership classes that they promote. So NeighborWorks was honored this year, along with BVH Architects, who had done the design work for this project, and Sean Reba and Greg Munn, Sean from NeighborWorks and Greg from BVH, were kind enough to appear at the annual meeting and receive the award. I'll let you sort out which one is Greg and which one is Sean. They both have facial hair. One is taller than the other, and that would be the architect. Great Commoner Award is PAL's Preservation Education Award. And there's been great range over the 23 years of the award in this category. A few years ago, it was Hildegard Center's project called Hearing from Heroes, where they worked with Lincoln High students on recreating some of the stories of people buried at Wyuka. Then more recently, Barb Marion Hacker's publication on the restoration project at the Nebraska State Capitol was honored. Many years ago, a little tour book for Haymarket, I think, received this award. It's out of print and sort of out of date because a lot has happened in Haymarket in the last couple decades. And so Historic Haymarket, the organization that promotes the area, got together a committee working with Downtown Lincoln Association, which is sort of their parent organization, and with the city planning department. They reached out to talent in that department and put together a brand new tour book, which we will celebrate in a couple days with their public release of the book. They had funds from the Convention Visitor Bureau to do this project, and the first run, at least, will be given back to the people who paid those taxes. So this will be a no-price book, and it won't last very long. It emphasizes all of the historic properties in the district, and such things as Barry's Bar sat on the site of an old hotel where Oscar Wilde actually stayed when he came to Lincoln. And this photo of Oscar Wilde, at least, is dated the year he was in Lincoln. So I don't think he's photographed in the old Arlington House Hotel, but he's in the book. And the many historic buildings, historic warehouses, and even some properties that are not there today or are altered to the point that you need the book to quite recognize some of them. And lovely map drawn by Stacy Hageman in the planning department to orient people to the extended district, cover a broader area than in the 1980s book, because I think Haymarket is seen as a broader area. And with the National Register designation, we kind of pulled those boundaries out even further. So they also, working with DLA, have put the tour book online. And so if you don't have your paper copy with you, you can access it by haymarkettour.org. And so PAL presented the Great Commoner Award to Historic Haymarket for the online and print version. And Diane Cunningham and Jeff Cunningham of Historic Haymarket, who headed up the committee, here flank Ross Felton, who helped in the design and the internet side of this publication. Ross is with the DLA, and they came to the annual award and received their plaque. And I can tell you from a planning department perspective, they were fun to work with. Mm-hmm. City Center Award was another that I think wasn't there in the very beginning, but was added within just a couple of years, because sometimes what's breathing vitality into our city isn't a bricks and mortar project, but an activity or something that draws people into the city center. I think PAL has also wisely stretched that center a little further year to year, because we're not just Haymarket or downtown, but we are a city. And bringing vitality into the traditional parts of the city is a broader than one neighborhood activity. And projects like Farmers Market, which I think explains on Saturday mornings from May to October why people live in cities, so that they can get together and do things like this. Was honored. The Children's Museum was honored. A couple years ago, the two new art galleries or art studios in the Antelope Valley area were honored. Constellation Studios, Karen Kuntz's project, and Assemblage, the Duncans and LeBarons, beautiful private gallery right up against Antelope Valley Parkway, were honored. This year is the 25th anniversary of Lead Center for Performing Arts. Here's the construction photo with Kimball in the background. You don't see Kimball from that angle anymore, but it's still there and functioning, but so is Lead. Beautiful space, well used. As part of their 25th anniversary celebration, they published a book of all of those events that they've held, and the range is incredible. Elvis didn't play at Lead, but almost everybody else did. Elvis played at Pershing. So they kind of, I think now, sort of like George Washington having slept wherever, and when one is torn down, another, I think maybe now we can say Elvis would have played at Lead in a different chronology. A beautiful hall, and they've added smaller and more flexible spaces as well for some of their events. And I think of Lead as going from Susan Werner, a singer-songwriter and one of my favorites, to Suzanne Farrell. The range is incredible, and the vitality they brought to us in Lincoln is wondrous. And so PAL honored Lead Center for Performing Arts for its 25 years of invigorating downtown and all of Lincoln and all of eastern Nebraska and all of the region. And this captures Bill Stefan in his native habitat, but he also came to the event and received the award from Gary Martin. President's Award is a category that is whatever the president wants to make it. And for the work of being the PAL president, there should be a President's Award, and has been a very broad range, honoring luminaries like Jim McKee and Linda Hillegas, Clay Smith and Speedway Properties. And this year looks like a traditional preservation award, but it was something, it was a very appropriate President's Award. This is the old entranceway at Wyuka, designed in about 1910 by L.A. Lamoureux, Minneapolis architect. He also designed the stable, and the stable is still there. The entranceway obviously is not. The design of these buildings set the character of the new 2000 administration building and service buildings at the north end. But the one remaining Lamoureux building and the structure beside it of the dam is the stable. And the stable continued to be used even after horsepower days as a storage building and service building, and then began to be used as a summer theater called the Swan in the enclosed courtyard of the stable. But the building was getting quite worn. It lacked certain things that people today seem to expect in buildings, like heat, air conditioning, restrooms. It had electricity, kind of, and it needed a lot of work. And fortunately, through the Transportation Enhancement Program and a long, long effort to bring this project together, the stable just recently completed a lovely renovation and added those features that it had lacked previously, but respected the character of the building very, very well. And it will be available not only for the theatrical productions, but they created beautiful gathering spaces for community use. And the very first community use of the renovated stable was PAL's annual meeting this year. And building's looking very well. Lovely attention to the detail. And so PAL President K. Logan Peters honored the Historic Wyuka Foundation, which had stuck to this very long, protracted process, raised the matching funds to go with the Department of Roads funds, and got the work done. And so Nancy O'Brien, current president of Historic Wyuka Foundation, here is with K. Logan Peters receiving that recognition. And then we get to the Lifetime Achievement Oscar, but we don't call it Oscar, we would call it the Helen, because years ago we got permission very kindly from Helen Busalis to put her great name on PAL's highest award. And we try every year, and PAL can be extremely creative. And I can swear to how creative they can be, because one year they told me who that would be, and I prepared that part of the show, and they interrupted me right at the end and changed it on me. And so we try to sneak in the annual award because we don't want to knock somebody off balance, particularly when they're maybe on a high point. But this year we did honor Dan Worth and got him there, and I think surprised him. I think I have the photographic evidence of the surprise. But before that, we will do a quick, well, you can't really do a quick review of Dan's preservation career because it's been a long preservation career and a very distinguished one. And we don't want it to end, even though this program will. So we will review a small selection of the beautiful projects that Dan's been involved in. Many of these are beyond Lincoln, which is a great thing because when architects do their work beyond Lincoln, they import money back into the community. And that's been part of the architecture profession throughout Lincoln's history. We've had great architects here who've worked regionally and even nationally, and that continues. This is the Red Cloud Opera House done for the Cather Foundation, beautiful 1885 building. And I think if we zoomed way in on this photo at the base of those cast iron storefront posts, it would say Seton and Lee, Lincoln, Nebraska. All over Main Street Red Cloud, the Lincoln trademark appears more often than it does on Lincoln buildings. The Chadron State College administration renovation, and I didn't do all of my research, but I seem to remember this might be a George Berlinghoff building, who was a Lincoln architect practicing across the state. Some of the projects, the current use of the building is by far the most interesting and most handsome that they've ever had, in Constellation Studio, 21st to Know, Karen Kuntz's studio is that. And this was, Dan was involved in this project. A little bigger project that you might recognize is the Gateway Arch, where Dan headed up a corrosion study and historic structures report on this national monument. Back closer to home, work on Arbor Lodge, J. Sterling Morton's mansion in Nebraska City. The BVH firm, which Dan is a principal, has for many years done work across the region for the National Park Service, and has brought a wide range of projects. This is Little Rock Central High School, where they prepared a preservation plan for this nationally important site. Another that you might recognize, this is a mountain in South Dakota. Mount Rushmore, also for the Park Service, a study project. And not only our capital, but one of the other quite interesting capitals that goes tall without trying to be imitative, so they don't miss the mark, like another capital that tried to be imitative and did miss the mark. North Dakota State Capitol, fascinating complex that Dan worked on. The old courthouse in St. Louis, another project down by the arch. I believe this is where the Dred Scott decision was rendered, another nationally important site and a spectacular rotunda. This is not actually Holmes Lake. This is Raspberry Island Lighthouse Restoration Project. South Dakota Territorial Museum in Yankton. And another museum project where sometimes buildings need more than just a little. And this one needed a lot. And the Sioux City Museum after, I think, is a much more vibrant building and a much more inviting one than it was before. There's a reason why they called that earlier style, I think, often brutalism. And there are great brutalist buildings, but some of them need to be fixed. And this one got fixed. Wayne State College, this is Pyle Hall. And bringing it back home, Dan and BVH have been involved all through the long years and strenuous efforts of the restoration of the Nebraska Capitol. So Pal was very pleased to honor Dan Worth this year with the Busalis Award, and this is what Dan looks like surprised. And it was a lovely event, and all of the awardees gathered, and great to inaugurate the new uses of the Wyuka Stable. And I don't know where Powell will meet next year for the annual meeting. I don't know what the awards will be, but it will be an interesting place and interesting projects. Thank you. I take questions. I don't know that this is one of the kind of programs that generates questions. Roxanne?
How did the bakers determine what colors to paint the Hall House? Were there historic images?
Roxanne asked, how did the bakers decide what colors to paint the Hall House? The historic images are all black and white. I think they do show that the house was not monochromatic white originally. I don't know if the bakers did a paint analysis. I think they looked at the architecture, looked at the period, and guided themselves in that way, best I know. It was a very careful, long paint job, and it looks splendid. I don't know that they did paint analysis, which sometimes is a little tricky because you end up with a palette of colors that you're not going to spend that much time and that much money putting on the house you live in today. I think they did a wonderful project. Thank you all.